If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is your personal encounter with the paranormal, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc.? My wife of 22 years died earlier this year. She was every bit the happy homemaker. Every day after I went to work and she would make our bed like a soldier in basic training. It had to be just perfect, including the massive pile of throw pillows we had to unload every night and stack on a small couch in our room. During the last few months when she became bed-bound, I of course had to take over all the cleaning duties. Which did not include a daily making of the bed. So the pillows remained stacked on the couch for months without moving. The night she died, I was awoken by the sound of a fan in our room being knocked over. I turned on the light and the pile of throw pillows, which had not moved in months, fell into the floor and knocked over the fan that was about 2 feet away from the couch. I piled them up back on the couch and got back into bed. I checked the time to see how long I had been asleep. It was 2:12 in the morning. My wife's is February 12th. I have so many stories about this. My whole town is haunted, so haunted that town hall hired an investigation crew to come live here, and then dedicated an entire section in our library to the town's paranormal activity. My favorite, and most terrifying story is about the fog monsters. We get this Silent Hill-esque fog every now and then, and according to local legend, the silhouettes of figures can be seen when peering into the fog. Most people recount seeing the silhouettes of children and young adults believed to be settlers from the 1700s. There are these two figures in particular though that earn their own stories. One of them is a quadrupedal hound. They're massive, easily 6 feet tall, standing on all fours. The other seems to be a little girl, but what's notable about her is that only her dress really seems visible. Like you can make out her shape and outline just fine, but looking directly at her limbs or face seemingly makes them disappear while the floating dress stays. Although these figures seem dangerous, there hasn't been any reports of them actually hurting people. In my experience, they actually led me home when I was lost one day. I wasn't near them, but there's like a wave of fear that comes over you when you see them, that just screams go the other way. While I was lost, they seemed to group up and completely block off the roads, standing still, just staring at me. I got home by just going down whichever roads they weren't on. So in a sense, they seem pretty benevolent, but they might just have a strong sense of community, as I do live where they did. Back to the two special figures though, there's a legend of the girl visiting you in your dreams. Mostly appearing in the dreams of children, she beckons you into the woods to play with her. When you wake up, you get a strong urge to go back to the place she takes you in your dream, but apparently, nobody who returned to the woods while awake has returned. A lot of people who dreamed of her reported that they've seen her commune with animals, and has sometimes been seen with the quadruped. That leads me to believe that the quadruped is actually this lady's pet. Maybe not, but it's in my head canon for these guys. But these aren't what all the stories here are about. As an example, we have trails out in our woods for four-wheeling and dirt bikes. Sometimes while walking down one, the path straightens where it shouldn't and eventually leads to an opening in the woods. In the opening is a small cabin, a garden, and a sort of berry farm. Like the kind that's in a dugout pit and gets filled with water for an easy harvest. Legend says that a witch lives in the cabin, but the place is difficult to find. As a child, I tried mapping out all of the woods here to find it, but I've only ever been there twice, and both times were by accident. Anyway, this is from the town of Chester, New Hampshire. I can't say for certain that you'll encounter anything if you come here, but almost all of the residents have. Check out the library sometime if you're in the neighborhood. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to Home Depot, when I arrive at this stoplight. After sitting there about 15 or so seconds, the light turns green. As soon as it did, I felt like I couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like if something was telling me to not go just yet. After about a second or two, this red Ford Explorer barrels through the intersection, running the red at what must have been about 50 miles per hour. I'd how much exactly, but it went ridiculously fast. After the car sped through the intersection, I could move again. I don't know what that something was, but had it not been for that I would have probably not been able to tell you all this little story. When I was little, maybe 5, I would walk into my parents' bedroom to crawl into bed with them. Many times when walking into their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed. I would be paralyzed with fear, but being young I don't think I understood what I was seeing. I would take agonizing steps forward until I could crawl into bed and then cover myself completely in their blankets. She never moved, spoke or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal connections and shit, but this one really baffles me to this day. Happened a couple of years back and I still can't forget it. Warning, story is kind of a downer. Also, sorry that it's long, but this is about as condensed as I could get it. Most of my friends have had trouble with substance abuse throughout their lives, just the crowd I hung around with, I guess. Around the time of this story, one of my closest friends was clean off H for the longest they had ever been, a couple of months, but still fantastic progress for him, and things were looking good. We were hanging out one day and he gave me some great news. Since middle school, he and his mom had been fighting for a medical malpractice lawsuit that happened to him when he was younger, and they won. He got something like $10-15K out of the deal, so most of what we talked about that day was just how he was going to buy his mom something nice, and how he was going to use that money to finally go to college. I honestly hadn't seen him that happy in years, and it was great. A day or two later, I was sleeping like normal when all of a sudden I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning. I felt great. In fact, I felt absolutely euphoric. I felt like I was laying in the sun on the most beautiful summer's day in a puddle of 1,000 puppies, and that was just the first second. The next second was that X1000, and the next second that X1000 as well. Within moments, however, I went from "this is pretty nice" to "oh shit, something is seriously wrong," before blacking out. All of a sudden I was walking down the stairs to my friend's basement. It was absolutely destroyed with shit thrown everywhere, and empty bottles and syringes laying around. He was sitting there waiting for me on the couch with tears in his eyes. He just kept repeating that he was sorry and that he didn't want to hurt anyone. He said the money didn't last him long and he's back to being his broke-ass self, that he was sorry for bringing me there, and that he just needed to say goodbye to someone, before finally saying goodbye to me and everything fading out in another wave of euphoria. Me being logical to a fault and pretty straightforward, I woke up the next morning thinking, damn, what a weird dream, but not much else of it. Wrote it down in a dream journal I was doing at the time, and completely forgot about it. Ended up going to work and class like normal. Then a couple hours later my friend's mom called. She called me to break the news that my friend had passed away that night. Overdose. It wasn't until a couple of months later when another friend of mine, also ex-addict, was trying to console me by telling me how he went out with no pain, and how it was probably the best way to go when things started to get really weird. He started to explain to me what an overdose actually feels like, the overwhelming euphoria, and how it's impossible to explain to someone who's never experienced it before, me. It was then that what he was describing started to sound really familiar, and I went to my phone, opened my dream journal and started reading the entry from a couple months back to him out loud. He pretty much said, "Yeah, exactly that. Where'd you get that story?" And told him the whole thing. Both of us were at a loss for words, and I still am. As I said, I don't believe in this stuff, and if someone told me this story I would say they were high as fuck, but it's a memory that I will never forget. Growing up, my sister and I were good friends with our neighbor, Matt, who had a dog, Molly. Molly ran away one day, so the three of us set out into the nature preserve behind our houses to look for her. Matt's brother, Chris, set out separately. In the preserve is an old dam/mill from the 1700s that is rumored to be haunted. When we got to the mill we saw Chris and the dog on the other side of the river, maybe 30 yards away. "Matt, I got her, I'm bringing her home," Chris yelled. But something didn't feel right, and the three of us gave each other that look. We headed home knowing Chris would be a bit behind us since he'd have to go a mile or two out of his way to cross the bridge. When we got home there was Matt's mom and the dog. She was under the porch the whole time, she said. A little while later Chris showed up, having never even gone into that part of the woods. It was a Friday evening, maybe about 6 p.m. I was walking my dog through the woods. I was wearing headphones. I used to walk her all the time on this route, so no reason to be afraid. It was very rare to see anyone else walking at this time of day on a Friday, actually why I had chosen to walk her then, and I'm coming down through this field/valley, when all of a sudden I start to feel on edge. The feeling just kept getting worse, so I turned off my iPod and took my headphones out. I was half jogging by the time I got to the bottom of this field. My dog had taken off way ahead of me at this point. I squeezed through a hole in the fence and onto the dirt path surrounded by trees, took the usual right, and kept checking behind me. Well, here's the horrifying part. I keep turning around to check if anyone's behind me, and I see a someone, or some shadow-like figure, which is more what this looked like, flick from behind one tree to behind another, bigger oak tree. I think I audibly yelped at this point, but I kept power walking away. I was still fairly close to whoever/whatever this was, and tiny teenage me knew that I was unlikely to be able to outrun this thing. I kept walking a few more paces before turning around again. This goddamn thing is now standing right in the center of the path, further back near that tree. It has its arms straight down, but out from its sides, its hands were fists, and it was stood with this wide leg stance. I say thing because it looked like the shadow of a man. It looked like it had a cloak and a wide-ish brimmed hat, but the whole figure was completely opaque. It just looked angry, and it's staring right down the path at me. Needless to say, I sprinted home from there and practically had a panic attack when I made it back. No idea what it was, but I know what I saw. This was in the UK, and urban legend about that wood, and that crossroads area in particular, is that they used to hang people back on that oak tree way back when. Whatever the hell it was, it's not something I'll ever forget. My old apartment building, I would always see a cat. Kinda skinny black cat. I have a cat, but the cat I was seeing was not mine. I know it wasn't a real cat because it was in my apartment and I hadn't actually seen it, just glimpses of it. Well, one night my actual cat was already on my bed. Well, I felt another cat jump on the bed. My cat frizzed up and started hissing. She hardly hisses at anything. I definitely wasn't dreaming. My mum's experience with what she thinks was a ghost. She went outside around 10 p.m. for a cigarette years ago and saw a very elderly woman walking up our neighbor's back stairs to their veranda. Mum said she wanted to ask if she was alright. It was very rare for our neighbors to have visitors that late. They were also elderly, but Mum said she completely lost her voice and felt stunned, though she couldn't look away. She ended up getting out a hello and the woman just disappeared. The next morning, Mum made a joke to our neighbors asking why she wasn't invited over for their nightcap with their visitor, and they very casually replied, "Oh, so you've now seen our ghost too?" They were excited over it and not at all scared. Barry, neighbor, says an elderly lady follows Elwin, his wife, everywhere, and they feel pure comfort around her, but their own children and grandchildren are frightened by the lady on the stairs when they stay. I have several, but the first I remember is when I was 4/5 and I lived in a house 3 houses up from a graveyard. I was asleep and woke up to a noise and saw a cat walk through my dresser. We didn't have any pets. Years later, my grandmother told me she saw that same cat a few times when she came to visit. Another night I was sleeping and my arm was hanging off the side of the bed and something was breathing on my fingers. Needless to say, I'm terrified of any body part being out from under the covers when I sleep. My mom told a story of seeing a soldier sitting on our porch when she pulled into the driveway. Scary part was we were home with my dad at the time and were sleeping. She said when she got out of the car he was gone, but she knew she had saw it. In my hometown in northern FL, we would sometimes get a thick fog that was terrible to navigate. I was always told by my grandparents that if I ever saw Confederate soldiers walking in that fog, keep my head down and move along even if they talked to me. Rare advice for the South. As for Yankee soldiers, I was to nod and point them in a direction if they said they were lost. And if I ever ran into a woman in a white dress named Caroline, don't tell her your name and excuse yourself before she touches you. The house I grew up in had a friendly spirit. It was a woman in a white gown. Sounds scary, but when you saw it, it would make you feel at ease. I believe both my parents, my Nana and I all saw it at different times. Another time my family was touring a fort on the coast of Ireland. I looked over to a big dark opening in the brick wall and watched a figure walk into the darkness. This was a section of the fort that was off limits. Not a minute later, our tour guide tells us a story of a man that was killed in an explosion in that area. I believe it was where they stored the gunpowder, and that he has been seen on several occasions walking through the courtyard. Of course, having not spoke up right away, no one fucking believed me, but I will take this to tinge fucking grave. Ain't nobody can tell me ghosts aren't real. When I was around 10 years old, I woke up to what I thought was my mom calling my name. I remember wincing my eyes when I sat up in bed, like someone had just turned on the lights. I opened my eyes and there was an angel at the foot of my bed. It was so bright I couldn't look at it for long periods of time. It looked exactly like how angels are depicted in art and religious text. I remember it had its arms out with its head tilted a little down and to the side. It had hair to its shoulders. It had neither feminine or male features, like it could have been either or from its appearance. Its eyes were closed and it didn't have a halo or anything, just an extremely bright light and aura around it and behind it. It was massive and seemed like it was coming from another dimension or open portal, because it would not have fit in the space in front of my bed. Normally, I would have freaked out and screamed for my mom or ran to their room. But it brought this calming, warmth, safe energy that filled the room. I've never felt anything like it before, but if I had to compare it to something, I would say how a baby feels inside their mother's womb. So I'm trying to look at this angel and it starts speaking to me. But it's in my head. I remember the vibrations were so loud when it spoke that I said ouch and kind of put my hands on my head in response to the intensity. It lowered the vibrations and asked me, "Is this better?" I responded yes. Its mouth never moved. It was a conversation telepathically. I remember asking simple 10-year-old questions like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" It responded with, "I am neither male or female." Things like that. When it gave me answers, it was like an instant answer and knowing inside of me. I can't explain it. After asking it a couple simple questions and it answering them, it told me something. I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but I remember shaking my head yes that I understood. I remember feeling really sad when it left, like I wanted to go with it. I laid back down and went to sleep. Woke up and ran to my mom and told her all about it the next morning. To this day I take the time to go over that night and remember what it looked like, so I don't ever forget it. Also, I have tried to remember what it told me, but I can't. Maybe I'm not supposed to remember, or I will when the time is right. I've never had sleep paralysis and it was not a dream. This is more glitch in the matrix maybe? Years ago, I went to a friend's Halloween party and right after walking in the door I saw this guy across the room, immediately recognized him, and thought OMG. I haven't seen you in years. Waved in excitement and he did too with the same fervor. After I made my way across the room and we began talking, I slowly realized that I wasn't sure I knew him. As we both tried to figure out where we had met each other, we realized we had never met and didn't have any friends in common. He was at the party somewhat randomly through an acquaintance. I thought it was just me with this feeling, but he swore he knew me too. After chatting for a bit that feeling faded and I had no feeling of familiarity anymore. Even typing this story out doesn't do the feeling justice, it was so strong, like revisiting a place you've spent a lot of time but haven't seen in a long time. Anyways, we figured out we didn't know each other, had never met, and were both somehow mistaken. I figure we must have been best friends or lovers in another life. I'm not really sure I really believe in past lives, but it was such a strong feeling that I've never felt with anyone else and doubt I'll ever feel again and cannot explain it all. Anyone else have this happen? Watched this movie when I was around 9 or 10. Watched it with my whole family, and as it was happening I kept saying, wait, I've seen this movie before. My sister said that's impossible, this movie just came out, yet I was able to recite every scene and exactly what was going to happen. My family was freaked out because they just rented this movie and obviously they didn't go with me to the movie theaters to watch it with me. I don't know why I knew everything that was going to happen in the movie, but I just did. And to this day I have no explanation as to why I had already seen a movie that I had never watched before. I still haven't been able to find the name of the movie anywhere, which is another mystery. But it was about this girl who has a hit and run of an older man one night coming home, and she doesn't want anyone to find out, so she hides him in her garage. I remember the end of the movie ending with the guy lighting the garage on fire or something. Does anyone know what movie this is? I've been trying to find it for years. My parents' house has a ghost. When my sister, 42, was about 5, she started talking about the Green Lady. Of course us older 3 sisters made fun of her a lot. She continued for several years talking about the Green Lady. Then one day when I, 48, was in middle school, I went upstairs and heard a swooshing sound. I turned to see what it was. There was a lady with a long green dress, like from the 1800s, and dark hair tied up really pretty. Then just like that she was gone. I never saw her again, but my mom took in a little boy for a while for a family that needed us when I was in high school, and he always talked to a lady upstairs when he was alone. He was only 3 when he stayed with us. Also, lots of weird things happened in my parents' house. Cupboards would open and shut on their own and the water faucets would turn on by themselves. I don't know the history before our house was built, but it would have been newly claimed land in the early 1800s. Well, I have a few stories. And I believe that until you experience something paranormal, you'll never truly believe it's possible, so I completely understand if no one buys what I'm about to say. A family member of mine passed away 7 years ago. A few months after he passed away, I had a dream where he visited my house. He was walking around throwing water everywhere. I fully believe he was visiting me. After that, weird little things started happening around the house. Hearing things that could easily be passed off as a house making regular house sounds. And then some unexplainable things happened. I should mention, it was completely in his personality to mess with all of us when he was alive. In 2019, my best friend and I were hanging out in my room, watching movies, talking, whatever. I have a connected bathroom and the door to this bathroom wasn't fully shut, it was open about an inch. As we're talking, she notices the door looks more closed and she points it out. Well, that's weird. None of us had gone to use the bathroom. This door doesn't close by itself. I've lived in this house since I was a kid and the door always has to be forced closed. I explain that to her and we stay watching the door. That door slammed closed while we were looking at it and we scream our heads off and run out of the room. Goosebumps everywhere. I knew immediately it had to be my cousin, he had to be messing with us. It's absolutely something he'd do. My best friend is terrified of using that bathroom now. I believe I was visited by an angel, some years ago. I was out with my college class, collecting water samples in the local river for viewing. Within 2 minutes of getting in the water, I fell and got soaked. In temps of 25 degrees, the river was slightly icy. I brushed it off, then I fell again. And again. And then a third time. I gave up, walking back to the group to mix some chemicals or whatever. After an hour, the teacher noticed how soaked I was and offered to let me leave early with another group back to campus, 0.25 miles away, via car so I could get in a warm shower. I refused, and a few minutes later I was asked to refill a pitcher in the river. The bank was muddy and I fell in, getting even more soaked, and now I had mud all over me because I took my waders off. I walked back at once, threw my hands in the air, and got in the car. I heard sirens in the shower. When I got back I was told that someone was hit on the road we were working by. Later I learned a group mate of mine was hit and killed by a car. I don't blame the guy, he was on the way to the hospital for his wife, who had cancer, and was just driving a tiny bit fast. The person who was hit, Bird, was walking slightly ahead of the group. If the others had been walking at his pace, everyone and the teacher would have been hit. If I had been walking with the group, I would have likely been walking beside Bird. He and I walk at the same pace. We were next to each other on the way to the river, and we would have likely talked together on the way back. I truly believe that someone, up there, wanted me to live. I'm normally clumsy, yes, but not like this. I kept tripping over literal air, and went underwater when I shouldn't have. I'm good at keeping my head up when I fall. I just question why me, and why Bird couldn't have been saved as well. I was trapped in a recurring dream over an extensive period of time, where I had to get out of a skyscraper. The top floors were more research-based, while the bottom ones were centered around reception with things like art and sculptures on display. For a decent portion of time, I couldn't escape the building, but every additional time I had the dream, my previous self guided me past the place of my initial mistake. By the time I got out of the building, it felt like I had decades into the future. I got anniversary pictures done with my husband, and our photographer asked about a memorial tattoo I have on my shoulder. It's for my childhood best friend that was killed in a car accident. The photographer suddenly starts asking questions about the accident that I haven't even talked to my husband about, the guy not being charged, etc., and then knew about details of our friendship that again, I didn't even tell my husband about. I felt guilty about us growing apart. Photographer says my friend is there and I look beautiful, and that I shouldn't feel guilty that we grew apart because we were still best friends. I slept at my grandparents' pretty frequently growing up. I hated it. I remember there was an animal skin on the wall my grandparents used for decoration. Guess it was a thing? And these little people, looking back I think I would classify them as fairy-like, would zoom from the skin to my covers and laugh/jump all the time. They would play around on my covers and then sort of hang off the skin when they jumped back to it, scaling their little terrain. Even as a kid, I remember I would frequently check that skin during the day for bumps/abnormalities that would lead me to believe I saw something moving on it when I didn't, and of course there was nothing. Now I chalk it up to a high imagination period. However, one thing I do not attribute to my imagination was when I went to stay at my grandparents' when I was somewhere between 11 to 13. I stayed in this same room. The skin had been tossed or moved by this time, and went to lay down for bed one night. I am a very light sleeper, and my grandpa always watched TV downstairs for most of the night while my grandma would come up and sleep around 10 p.m. and their room was down the hall and to the right of mine. Anyway, as I laid down around 9:00 p.m/2100 I kept hearing footsteps on my ceiling. The footsteps had a rhythm to them, and you could hear the weight of each step, and they would walk perpendicularly across the room above my bed left to right and sometimes walk back right to left, the way they came, or sometimes the footsteps would reset on the left side and walk across again. I initially thought, oh, they have a pull-down attic, but there isn't any room for walking and my grandparents wouldn't be up there. Maybe a squirrel. To double-check my hypothesis, I went and checked on my grandparents, Grandpa watching TV downstairs with Grandma. Weird. The pull-down attic was also above the stairs and sealed shut. So I go back to lay down, and the walking continues for like 20 minutes and Grandma comes up and walks to bed. Finally, I get up and tell my grandma about the strange noise and ask for a fan to drown out the noise. I set the fan up, lay down, and try to get some rest. Oh boy, the footsteps intensify now and the pacing seems to pick up to go over the fan. On one particular pass the footsteps stopped midway on the ceiling, directly over my bed, and plain as day something with a deep voice whispers into my left ear. So, you know I'm here. I don't think I could get out of a bed so quick again. Slept in my sister's room on the floor after that. Recently I'll think of something and it just happens. One time I was walking home from school and thought of these big chocolate cupcakes that my parents would get me when I was younger. When I got home my mom told me she actually bought some while I was out. I hadn't had those cupcakes, nor asked for them for about 7 years. Dad was out with his GF about 2 hours away from home and I had the house to myself. I was showering about 4 to 7 hours before I expected them to return, and I heard our garage door open. It had a very distinctive sound due to the way it echoed through the kitchen and across the open plan, tiled house. Immediately heard the clicking of his GF's boots and knew it was her from how short she was compared to the rest of the family. She walked like she had to prove something to make up for her height. She was definitely saying something to my dad too as she entered, and I could hear him say something back. Since it was so early for them to be home, I had a feeling something was off. I was already basically done with my shower, so I hopped out and threw on a towel, opening the door and looking down the hall and across the house for them. I absolutely pulled the horror movie rookie move of investigating in a towel. Walked the length of the house, saw the gate outside was still closed, opened the door to the garage and saw it empty, and even did an extra loop to rule out me missing something. I was 100% home alone still. This wasn't the first time I'd heard something home alone, it was just the most distinct. My whole family has heard the slider doors open. When I went car shopping with my dad, my sister heard the garage door and the door into the house from the garage open. No one came home then either. My dad has seen people on the property at 3 a.m. but they're gone without a trace and too fast for a real criminal to be snooping. The house just makes noises that imitate us and aspects of the home. The walls don't bleed though, so we still live there. I do not believe in ghosts, spirits, etc., but I have experienced two completely unexplainable phenomena in my life. The first occurred in college. I was in a girl's dorm room, she was sitting at her desk, talking to me, when a marker that had been sitting on her roommate's desk a minute before, flew across the room and hit her in the head. There was no one in the room other than the two of us, and neither of us could have thrown it. I exclaimed some variant of "what the fuck?" And she calmly responded, "Oh, that's my ghost. He shows up sometimes, especially when I'm alone with some guy." That's all she would say on the subject. The second was when I was driving alone, late at night. I worked at a computer repair shop, and figured out I could get so much more work done and close out a lot of high-value tickets if I stayed after closing and worked without customer interference. I lived about 20 miles away, in Lompoc, California, which is close to Vandenberg Air Force Base. They do a lot of launches out of there, but what I saw that night was no goddamn launch. I was on an isolated area of Highway 1, driving home at 2 a.m., when I saw a streak of light. It crossed from my left to my right in less than 1/10 of a second. Slower than lighting, but just at the edge of the point where I detected definite motion. It was bright, electric blue. A perfectly straight line. There is no afterimage, it was just gone. I still can't explain it, it was definitely in the distance. I don't know if it was some sort of high-energy weapon test, or something else, but I was wide awake despite the hour, thanks Mount Dew Code Red, and I cannot provide any natural explanation for what I saw that night. I have a 30-pound weighted blanket. If you've never tried a weighted blanket you should, they're the best. It's inside a big thing that's like a pillowcase, but for a blanket. One of the sides is white, and the other side is blue. I always sleep with the blue side facing up. One night I went to sleep with the blue side up, as usual. I woke up in the middle of the night with the white side up, perfectly made, as if someone had just covered me and taken great care in doing so, not like it fell on the floor and someone just pulled it back on. I am 5 feet 2 inches and have a hard time lifting the blanket up when I make my bed, so I really don't think I could have done this whole sleepwalking. I also don't sleepwalk. It happened a few months ago and I still think about it sometimes and get anxious. Well, a few days ago my Ring doorbell went off and I hear knocking outside. I checked the camera and nobody was there and the motion sensing light didn't turn on. I checked everywhere downstairs to see if somebody broke in and there was nobody. When I turned off the light and walked up the stairs I hears a knock on the door behind me. When I ran upstairs I checked outside the window again and nobody was there. I fell to sleep after a few hours of lying in bed like usual and I haven't heard it since it happened 6 days ago. When I was in college in the late 1990s my mom had been dating a man for several years. He was killed in a freak accident on his way to see her late at night. His car hit a patch of ice, but he survived the accident, and stepped on a live wire he had knocked down hidden by some snow. My mom was returning home from the funeral home one evening and my brother and I were waiting for her at home. We saw her car pulling up outside from the window into our driveway. It was dusk and we could see a male figure in the front seat with dark hair. We said to each other that my uncle must have come home with her for support as he had also been at the funeral home that night. Neither of us thought anything of it, and we went into the kitchen. Except when she came into the house she was alone, still not thinking of anything. I said, "Hey, where's Uncle so-and-so?" She said, "Who?" I said, "Yes, he was in the car with you." She said, "There was no one in the car with you," and my brother and I both looked at each other and said, "Oh, there was definitely someone in the car with you," and we told her what happened. He was clearly stuck. A few other weird things happened. Like the side of the bed where he slept would go down as if someone was sitting on it, but no one was. Eventually though it stopped. On the flip side, my dad died after a long battle with cancer. We had an agreement that if he could come back he would. To date the only odd thing that has happened is that in the months immediately after he died, I could not sleep so I would leave the TV on at night. I would wake up every single morning with CMT on. My dad had played in a country music band. So maybe? It did not matter what channel I put on. I always awoke with that one on. So, my birthday this December was ass. Like seriously the only way it could have gone worse was if I dropped a fucking knife on my foot. My dad left in late autumn in 2020. I miss my friends cause I can't see them due to COVID, and basically everything in my life has gone to shit, with the only thing bringing me joy at this point being games and my mom. So a few days ago, I started cursing out the universe by myself while walking dogs, to which the universe slammed a bird in my face. I got bitch slapped by the universe. Definitely never questioning if the paranormal exists again. My grandfather passed away 3 days before my 4th birthday. I was always close with him and I actually slept in the bed with my grandparents as a young child. It's funny because I don't have many early memories but this one is as clear as if it happened last night. The night after my grandfather died I was in bed with my grandmother as usual. I remember looking up because there was a light shining on us and my grandfather was standing at the end of the bed, just the way he always did before getting in. My grandmother also saw him standing there, but she heard him tell her that she was going to be alright. This is always something that has been shared in my family as proof of an afterlife. I don't believe that it was a dream, and even if it were it would be almost impossible for my grandmother and I to have had the same dream at the same time. I feel like it was my grandfather coming one last time to let my grandmother know that he was okay, and that she would also be okay, and I was lucky enough to be a part of it being in bed with her. I'm 34 and it's been 30 years since this happened and I can still remember it like it was yesterday. December of 2018 I was alone at home as my ex was out of town on a work trip. One night, I woke up to the sound of rumbling and keys opening the door. I get up and run towards the hallway that overlooks the stairs and front door. When I see the handrail I immediately notice the handrail of the stairs is decorated with lights and a poinsettia wreath spiraling down to the rail. I was incredibly confused as I had never decorated it. Then a second later, a man walks into the door. I still remember his face so well. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, military haircut. I think it's worth noting that we lived in a military base. Basically every who lived in housing was active military. He was light skinned, he looked mixed, thin but in shape, he looked like a runner. Well, I'm watching this man walk into my house, take his jacket off and put it on the side, on top of this small bench. All of this is happening so fast but it felt so fucking eternal. As I'm watching him do this, I say out loud, "What the fuck?" And he looks up to where I'm standing and he is just as surprised as I am and he goes, "Oh shit." Then, I run back to my room and hop back in bed. It's only then that I wake up, again. I immediately run towards the hall but this time there is not poinsettia wreaths and lights on the handrail and there is no man coming in the door. It's as if I had crossed to an alternative reality for a minute. Perhaps in a parallel reality that man lived in that house and I somehow glitched in the matrix and crossed to his universe and saw him. Lol, he probably still talks about that to his buddies like I talked to mine about it, haha. It was fucking bizarre. At the time this event took place, my son was about 4.5. We moved to a new place that has a downstairs family room with a fireplace in it. My then husband did not sleep in a bed with me, but on the family room couch, another story altogether, and our son liked to bring his sleeping bag down there and sleep on the floor by his dad. One night the ex decides he's going to make a fire so he gets some wood from outside, puts it in the fireplace and tries to light it. Despite many attempts the wood will not light, it's still too green. Not to be thwarted, he goes out to the garage and returns with a coffee can filled with kerosene and dumps half of it on the wood. He hits it with his cigarette lighter, up it goes and he puts the coffee can on a shelf by the fireplace. I noticed that my son was watching intently as he did this so I comment quietly to the ex that he is being observed and will need to put the kerosene back in the garage so that the boy won't try to get into it. The ex did not like anyone to tell him what to do and retorts in a snotty tone that he will get to it when he is finished. I don't want to start a fight so I go to bed to read for a while. Soon I fall asleep with the light still on. About an hour later, I am being shaken awake by someone grabbing my arm. I'm really deeply asleep and try to turn over to get away from the shaking. Then I am grabbed again by the forearm and pulled hard out of bed. Just before I hit the floor I look at my forearm, see a man's hand on it, look further and see the man's arm and that is all there was, just a disembodied arm. Then I hear a voice say, "You need to check on David now." I am starting to freak out with the way I've just been awakened, adrenaline kicks in and I run down to the family room. My son is sitting up on the shelf by the fireplace mantel, has taken the lid off the coffee can and dumped kerosene all down the front of his pajamas. In his hand is my ex's cigarette lighter and he is doing his best to light it. The fumes are enough to make him go up in flames. I can smell them from the doorway. I don't think my feet even touched the floor in getting to him, as I knew that even a spark could set him off. The ex is fast asleep on the couch, blissfully unaware of the fact that our son is about to become a human torch. His cigarettes are on the floor next to the couch and I knew the cigarette lighter had been right on top of them, an irresistible temptation for our son. After I got David cleaned up and put to bed, I went over to my ex and slammed both fists down on his chest as hard as I could. He wakes up sputtering and starts to protest, whereupon I tell him to shut the fuck up, told him what just happened and that I would be filing for divorce as soon as possible, because clearly his ego was way bigger than his desire to keep our son safe and he couldn't be trusted around him. The narrowly avoided tragedy with my son greatly overshadowed how I was informed of it, and I only thought of the disembodied arm later that long night as I was taking a hot bath in the vain hope of relaxing enough to get to sleep. There were 5 very clear bruises on my forearm in the configuration of a right hand. Oh yes, I filed for divorce the following week. I lived in a house that was built in 1827. The owners, my friends, told me about ghosts in the place. I am not a ghost believer, so I never gave it much thought. One night I woke up at about 2 a.m. to pee. I looked down the staircase to the front door and a woman was standing there looking out the window. I was surprised to see her there because it was just me and my roommate living there. I said, "Hello," and she just kinda missed it away. She had thick black hair and was wearing a patchwork dress that reached the floor. The house was the original farmhouse along the Ohio River from way back when. So I went to the bathroom and got back in bed. I wasn't scared at all, which is weird because I always assumed that if I saw a ghost I would run away and never come back. In preschool I would always hang out with a girl named Alex. She was my best friend at the time and I would always go home and tell my mom what Alex and I did that day. But my mom got worried because I told her that Alex would always wear the same clothes to school every day. At a parent-teacher conference my mom brought in clothes for Alex, but my teacher said that they didn't have an Alex in the class, but they had noticed that I was always talking to someone who wasn't there. One of the other teachers told us about how there was an Alex in the class last year, but she had died of, if I remember correctly, a brain-related disease, possibly cancer. She brought out a picture of Alex and I confirmed that was my friend that I had been talking to. We got paranormal experts involved in everything. They suggested that I told Alex that I couldn't play with her anymore, to prevent her from getting too attached to me. So I did, and I didn't see Alex again after that. Most of what I know of the story is what my parents told me, but I vividly remember Alex. It's nothing that scares me. It's really pretty cool that I was the one that she decided to hang out with at her old preschool. My nephew was playing football with his friends when he simply just fell to the floor and died aged 11. After his autopsy we could go and see him in his coffin. I was just sitting there staring at him in disbelief and I felt so helpless and sad. I just wanted him to know that I love him, so I gave him my watch. That night me and my partner are in bed and we hear a ticking clock. We have no ticking clocks in the house. It goes on for about a week. The last day it happens we both hear it in our bedroom. I say, "I'm glad you like the watch, Bailey," and with that the ticking got quieter until it was silent again. I broke down in tears. I knew it was him and he came to say thanks and goodbye. This is probably getting lost in the comments, but I've never shared this story before and have never made sense of it. When I was probably about 9 years old, I was up late one night at my desk drawing. It was probably about 1 a.m. on a weekend. Anyways, both my parents dealt with insomnia and would often be up all hours of the night around the house. On this particular night, at some point I began to hear heavy footsteps going up and down the staircase outside my bedroom door. It barely even registered for me. If it wasn't my parents, it was probably my night owl little sister. However, I turned to the sound of my doorknob and my father pokes his head in with a concerning scowl on his face. He asks me if I've been walking up and down the stairs. Without a pause I replied, "I thought it was you," and my heart promptly dropped. He said, "Your sister is asleep and so is mom, get in the room." Both my parents were trained in firearm safety. While my mom stayed in the master bedroom with us kids and the door locked, my father went downstairs with his gun and began safe protocol for house intruders. While he was giving warnings and advising the intruder to leave, we all heard things knocking around here and there. The police were called and surrounded the house. My father came in later and informed us that they found no one in the house, even though the couch was pulled out from its position and my father saw someone duck behind it. Kind of a short part 2 to this story, but unrelated to this incident. We ended up moving out about 6 months later. Around the exact same time of year, the same exact incident happened again at our new house. I was at an airport once. I used to travel for work to visit the headquarters of the company I worked for at the time. I used to be a creative person and now I work for a corporate giant and it seems like a soulless job. So there I was at the airport all depressed. I mean, I didn't and still don't want to spend my entire life working in a boring job and also extremely difficult. So I asked the universe, God, to give me a sign that I was where I was supposed to be. That this was okay for me to go through because this was the plan. I asked for a specific sign, to show me a lot of roses, but then I thought roses were too obvious and they would be everywhere. Then I asked, okay, peonies. Peonies are more rare. So I kept going back and forth and I was like, whatever, who cares? And went to the bookstore to get a book because my flight was long. I chose a book by Margaret Atwood alias Grace. I bought it and found a seat because I was still waiting for the flight. First chapter, first page, out of the gravel there are peonies growing. I will never question whether the universe or God is listening to me. This was a very crazy proof. I cried at the airport to be able to have such a powerful sign given to me.